I'm going to show you how you can turn just 4 feet of Dyneema into a Dyneema grommet. My name is Herb Benevent, and I invented this system back in 2014 when I was coming up with a way to rig our boat entirely with synthetic standing rigging using deadeyes instead of turnbuckles. So this whole system was just to create the deadeye that would then support the entire standing rigging. So this will create a ring out of rope that you can use to attach anything you want. It is super strong, very tiny, and practically indestructible. And if you're interested in making your own synthetic standing rigging using deadeyes, this is the process to make the deadeyes that then allow you to attach the chain plate at the bottom and the stay at the top with lashings. Check it out. The first thing you need is your Dyneema. Now this is SK78, but you can also do this with SK75. Both will work very well. The important thing is that it is single braid and 12 strand. The materials you're going to need to make one deadeye are going to be 4 feet of Dyneema. In this case we're using 9mm Dyneema, so this is very hefty, very large stuff, but it's also incredibly strong. This is actually the same material that we use to hold our entire mast up. So all of our deadeyes that are used for our synthetic standing rigging are made out of 9mm SK78. Each grommet consumes 4 feet of line. With the grommet, what you're essentially doing is making a big loop in Dyneema. So pretty much you're making a big rope ring. The thing is, you can't just glue these two ends together, because if you could, you wouldn't be watching this video because you'd have just glued them together. So what you need to do is bury them in a way that produces a very strong attachment. The problem with Dyneema is that it is incredibly slippery, so it's a class 2 fiber. So the proper way to do a splice where you bury this one into the other is you need to bury 72 times the diameter of the line into the thing. So that means that for 9mm line, you need to bury about 25 inches. That means that your rope ring, at a minimum, is going to be 25 inches long, because if you think about it, both of these tails have to be buried 25 inches. Now there is a workaround, and that's what we're going to do so that we can make a very small Dyneema grommet. So this one's going to come out to be about 10 to 12 inches long. It's very small, and that lets you attach something and not take up a lot of space. The first step is to measure everything. You can't just glue these together, they need to be buried into each other. So you're going to start running along until they meet back at the beginning. Now you technically have as much line as you can possibly bury measured out, because this is where they meet and this is where it starts. So at the crossover point, you're just going to mark that, and that's where your splice begins. So to do the first splice, you're just going to push the fibers together, that way the weave opens, and then you just slip your fid right between the fibers. It's really important that you make sure it comes out straight in the middle, because everything in this has to be absolutely symmetrical. Now that the first part has gone through, we're just going to measure everything and make sure that we have it totally balanced here. We have the cross through up here, where one strand actually pierces through and comes out on the other side. Lay them flat and run them out. You want them to be just totally even. So you can see here is the hoop, so this is going to be the bottom of the grommet, and each of the leg comes to the same point. That means we're good. At this point, what I like to do is put a pin in it, that way it will not move. The purpose of the pin is just to lock it together while we're doing the next step. What we're going to be doing is a Möbius Brummell Splice in the grommet. If you're doing a normal Möbius Brummel Splice, what you do is you simply cross them again. This one that passed over, you're then going to pass it through the next one, and then the one that went through is then going over. Now that creates a nice lock, and then these get buried into each other and everything is hunky-dory. Problem is, you don't have access to do that in a grommet. You can't. There's nowhere to go. Everything's on the other side. So you can't get this to go through the other part because it's a loop and it's locked and it's stuck. So that's where the trick comes in. What you're going to do is you're going to unravel this whole strand, and then you're going to re-braid it on the other side. And in doing so, you're then going to create the Mobius Brummel. It's going to pass on the other side, your splice is going to be locked, and everything's going to be good. Now you might be tempted to just open this one and then pass it through. And let's look at what happens when you do that. It'll look like a good shortcut, but I'll show you why that doesn't work. So when you pass them through, so that way it looks like a Mobius Brummel because you have the two ends crossing, so everything looks good, and when you pull in this direction, it's rock solid. The problem is, if you pull on this one, which is the actual one that's going to be loaded when you load up your grommet, it just pulls it right apart. And that is the problem. So what you need to do is create this setup, but on the other side. So that's why if you're tempted to just pass it through and call it a day, it won't work as strong. So everything is now secured. What we're going to do is we're going to unbraid this and then braid it again on the other side. So at this point, you have one line that is completely solid. Everything's as it was originally. And then the one that went through it has been completely unbraided into the 12 strands that it's made up of. When you position this as a grommet, you're then going to be able to pass the 12 strands around to the other side and then braid them again. What you're going to do is you're going to separate them. You can do some math here. 12 strands means that 6 strands need to pass on each side. And it's best to take them so that it's pretty darn even in the middle. So that when they pass, you want to keep them looking quite close together. That way it looks a little better. But the important part is to have 6 strands on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you pass them around to the other side. So what you're going to be doing is you're actually going to braid them back together on the other side, and that's going to give you this one passing through and then this one passing through, and that'll give you the Mobius Brummel with the lock in your splice of a grommet. So what we're going to do, you could either A, be a magical wizard at this and braid the 12 strands back the way they were, but that's really hard to do, and I can't even do that. So what I do is I do a much more manageable method, which is where I braid them into 4 sets of 3. And then those 4 strands, I then braid into 1. So let's braid the 4 sets together. All you're doing is you take your 3 strands, so you just take the outer one and put it to the middle, and then the outer one to the middle, and you just keep alternating like that until you get to the very end. So all you're doing is making a very simple braid, which just holds everything together. You don't want to make them too tight, because if they're really tight, then they're not going to lay as smoothly as you need them. So you just take the outer one and go in, outer one and go in, outer one and go in, and with practice, you'll go really quickly. And you don't want them super tight, you want them a little on the looser side, especially since at the end you need to smooth them out and make them smooth. Because if you do this smoother, then when you go to bury it, it'll bury a lot easier because there's no knurled edges that are going to catch on the inside of the line. So you can see we just did the braid, and it's a little bumpy, and it's not too straight, so then you just milk it out and feed it, and it just smooths right out. And this is what you want, a nice smooth line that you can then braid again. So at this point, when you have the 12 strands braided into 4 sets of 3, what you're going to do is you'll flip it over so that the separation happens underneath, and what you're going to do is you're going to cross the middle 2 first and pull them tight, and then the outer ones go next. Now it's important to keep in mind which one is on top. So here I have the right one, the one from the right on the bottom, and the one from the left on the top. So that means the next one's going to be the one from the right, and then the one from the left. What you're doing is you're braiding them, but you're making sure that the beginning is very, very tight. So you just go one at a time, outside first. You're just going to do that a few times until it's pretty darn secure. Now at this point, you're going to switch, and instead of going 1, 1, 1, 1, you're going to just focus on the left one. So the left one's going to go under, over, and then under. And then it comes out on the right. And then under, over, and under. And what you're going to do is braid the last the 4 that are remaining all the way to the end. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a nice big ribbon, kind of like a tape, and that you can then use to bury and continue the splice from there. So the goal is to recreate 12 braided strands, and since braiding 12 braid is quite complicated, it's just much easier to make it much smaller numbers. So you take the 12 strands and you simply break it apart into groups of 3, and you braid those 3 strands together 4 times. And then you take those 4 and you braid those 4 together. So in the end, you've braided the 12 strands together but you never had to deal with 12 strands all at once. So now at this point you have the original, which is beautiful and smooth, and then the one that you just did, which is going to be bumpy, flat, and really weird looking. Now after you finish braiding it, you're just going to pull it and just kind of smooth it out. The goal is to make it nice and smooth, that way it'll bury nice and easily and evenly. So now you have the grommet, so the rope is spliced here, and it's the locking splice. So you have the Mobius Brummel here, and then you have the two tails coming off, one tail on one side of the loop, and the other tail on the inside of the loop. So the advantage of the Mobius Brummel, and the way it all really works to lock everything together, is the only way for this splice to pull through is for these 12 strands and these 12 strands to come unraveled. That's what allows it to then go. So since they're braided together and then we bury them, they shouldn't budge. That's the whole idea behind this. When you do your bury, everything's going to get distorted. So it's really good to mark where the bottom is. You simply hold it at the top of the splice and pull down. And then the bottom is where you're just going to put your pin. And that's going to identify the bottom for you. So the reason you need to do that is while you're doing the bury and you start compressing this and scrunching it together, it's going to get shorter on this side. So that means that the first side you do, the middle is actually going to start clocking around to the other side. And then when you do the other one, you're going to end up short. So you need to have the bottom marked, that way you can bury both of them and then take it from there. Now, working with this very large pin is actually quite a pain. So I'm going to mark it with my finger, take it out, and I'm simply going to work the line until I reach that point. And then we'll just pop out of the weave there. And we know that this side that looks much shorter is actually equal in length to this side that looks a lot longer, simply because this one has the weave compressed and this one hasn't been bothered. So now, this is marking the middle and the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to bury the other side, and we're going to have it pop out at the same point. So to do that, I like to turn the whole grommet around. So you simply rotate it, so that instead of this being on the inside, and you're always trying to feed from the inside of the circle, you rotate it, and now you're working on the outside again. So now the fit is fed, but as you can notice, this isn't very good. This is not going to pass through easily, and it's definitely not going to hold in the back of the fid like the other side did. So in all of my splice videos, you'll notice I never use tape, I never use a marker. You just, once you get practiced at it, you don't need to use it anymore. So this is actually the one time that you will need it. No matter how good you get at this, you're going to need it to hold it all together. So you just wrap it up, form into a nice little tight spike at the end. You're going to feed this into the back of the fid, and then you'll push it through with the pusher. At this point, I like to pull it down nice and tight. Here you have the splice, and the bury is in very tightly. Immediately it ducks in, so you don't have to worry about having a little bit bunched up right before it goes into the outer braid. Then I'm going to milk the line back, and now ideally, and they are, both tails should be coming out from the middle and be about the same length. So now the next step is you're actually going to wrap these past. And what you're going to do is you're going to go 3/4 of the way through. So you're going to have the splice, it's going to run along and then go 3/4 in each direction. So what you're doing is you're creating this loop that's going to hook on and hug and really grab onto itself. And that helps make the splice even stronger, even though it's so short. So you can see this one here starts the bury here, runs all the way through, around, and comes out 3/4 of the way across it. So now we're going to bury this last one until it comes out here. Now you might be wondering, why not just feed the FID 3/4 of the way through the grommet? And the reason is very simple. FIDs are straight instruments, and to go 3/4 of the way over a circle means you need to curve. So by going halfway, you're able to straighten the piece so that way you can reach it, and then it just works. So you just go in stages. You can force the circle to become straight for a small section. You can't really force it to be straight for 3/4 of the way, especially once it gets bulky with the line inside of it. In case you're wondering, we are filming inside a boat. So now at this point, what you have is the splice, and then after the splice, it's buried and goes 3/4 of the way and comes out to a tail, and then 3/4 of the way and comes out to the other tail. So the splice itself is locked, and then it's locked again by the amount that's been buried. So we're going to pull this out all the way, we're going to take off the tape, and we're going to start our tapering. So I always look at this and think of a very happy little donut with its little arms out. It's just, you know, got the little arms, and you got the face. So what you're going to do is you're going to milk everything back in and see where you fall. Now as you milk it, you want to make sure that the end doesn't go in, because if it does, then you have to pull it back out, and that's kind of a pain to do. As you can see, the tails are about to go back in. Now you don't want to just let them go in all at once, because what's going to happen is you'll have a section where it's only one piece that's buried inside, and then immediately starts a section with 2 pieces buried inside. And then it's 2, and then 1 again. And at this junction, you're going to have a step, because the core is inside. One's going to be tiny, and the other's going to be huge. And where the casing wraps over it, that's going to be a stress point, and that's going to break. So we know that we are good on the tails for length, so we're going to pull them back out, and then we're going to taper them. Now the taper is really, really short, because there's really not much that you're working with here. They're already very short. So we're just going to pull out the pieces, cut them off, and then we'll pull it back in, and then the grommet is finished. So to do the taper, all you're going to do is count. So if you look, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you're working with 12 strand, which means you need to trim off 11 of these guys. So I like to start it by pulling them out one by one, and I kind of alternate where they come from just a little bit. That way they come out more staged. So the goal is to create a taper. So at the bottom right here, it'll have 12 strands, then it'll be 11, then 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Now it's a pretty quick taper here, because we don't really have much that we're working in. Now that you have them pulled apart, you're just going to cut off the ends. So this is 1 and 11. This one, since it's not the beautiful 12 braid and it's the braid that you just redid, I pull them out and then cut them off. And I kind of pull them out in order, just along the length of it. Not really paying attention to where it's coming out of exactly, because it's all a jumbled mess. Now I do take some stock in not pulling out all 3 from the same braid, because that's going to result in your braids coming apart pretty quickly. Because if you think about it, that means that you're going to take out 3/4 of your piece all at once, and then the next quarter, and that's not really the main intention. So the intention is to have some semblance of a braid continue. So I pull from different areas, just feathering my way up the length. Okay, so now we have both of them tapered down from full thickness to just a single one at the end. With this one, I like to then rebraid what was left. Just kind of twist it up, just to help hold it together a little better. And then the last bit of it, I actually twist that. Not that I'm trying to rebraid the 12 braid, but I'm just trying to make it taper down to a nice little spike and keep everything kind of held together just a little better. Now at this point, we have everything tapered down. The last thing is to pull them back in and be finished. So we're just going to milk the cover back over them, and to do that, you simply go from the splice down, and then you go from the middle point back up. You go splice and then middle, and you can see they just go right on in. with that, you've created a beautiful grommet. So it's a rope ring with a Möbius Brummell Splice here. So there's no need for any locking stitches or whipping or anything like that to secure it, because the splice itself locks it together. And then both tails are buried beautifully, and if you run your hand along it, you will not feel where one starts and the other stops. It's just a nice gradual transition from one to the other, all the way around the whole loop of rope. So this is a rope grommet made out of Dyneema using a Möbius Brummell Splice, and this will work as a deadeye for synthetic standing rigging. This is actually what holds up our rigging and what attaches the stays to the chain plates. So if you look, you pinch them together and you put a thimble on each side. This one goes to the chain plate at the bottom, and this one has the lashings that go to the stay at the top. And this is how you make a Dyneema grommet. So with this simple little trick, you can use just 4 feet of rope and create something that can hold up your boat and carry it across an ocean safely. All with minimal tools and about an hour of your time. Now this can be done out of all sorts of types of Dyneema. You can use amp steel, you can use Spectra, you can use plain Dyneema. They're honestly all different brands of the same material. So what all of it is ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, which is simply fancy plastic. Now this is not heat set type. The heat set type is a lot stiffer and doesn't really conform too well to this kind of procedure. So it's best not to use heat set for this. So just plain regular old fancy Dyneema will make these practically indestructible rope rings. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends.
And if you'd like to follow our journey in real time on a map, receive postcards from our ports of call, and message us directly to the boat, you can go ahead and become a patron using the link in the description down below.